Hello and welcome everyone. It's a pleasure to have you here with us today. I'm Maya from the Fearless Project. I'm a Pakistani American non-binary woman in my 30s. I'm wearing thick metal glasses and dark hair with pink and purple streaks partially tied back in a bun. I'm really happy to see so many of you joining from all over the world. From our last count, we had over 260 registered participants representing over 50 countries and 6 continents. I think what this incredible turnout demonstrates is that the time for building inclusive workplaces, especially in the aid sector, has come. I'm thrilled to share this journey with all of you, and I'm looking forward to knowing you all better. If you haven't already, I invite everyone tuning in to introduce yourselves in the chat. Feel free to share your name and pronouns, where you're joining from, and what you're most looking forward to in the webinar. A reminder that this event is being recorded for our friends who aren't able to join us live. As such, and to make the webinar more accessible, we will occasionally read and share comments from the chat. So while we encourage you to make free and liberal use of it, please do not share any sensitive information. If you require captioning, please click on the button below that says CC or live transcript. After the event, we'll be uploading an updated version of the closed captions for accuracy, along with the video recording of the event. All right. Now that I see the chat is getting some activity and you're all engaged, let's get started. So first, I'd like to give you an overview of the event. We're scheduled to go on for 90 minutes without any breaks, so I invite you to step away as needed and return whenever you can. In case you miss anything, you'll be able to catch all the details on the recording, which we will upload and share within 1 week of the event. Because we have so many people joining, we're using Zoom's webinar format. This means if you're not a presenter, you won't be able to turn on your video or unmute yourself, but again, we have the chat. We'll do our best to verbalize and answer all the questions and comments coming in, but we can't promise that we will get to them all during the event because of time constraints. So let's go through the agenda. First, we'll spend several minutes formally introducing you to the Fearless Project, what drives us, who we are, what we do, and how we do it. Next, we'll share the findings from our extensive research on what works and what doesn't in the diversity, equity, and inclusion industry, also known as DEI. Where relevant, we'll bring it back to the global aid sector, although most of that discussion will be held during our exciting panel of DEI practitioners working in global aid and development. We'll keep it open for questions and answers, which you're welcome to start using immediately. It will be easiest for us to catch your questions if you use the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen, but we'll also do our best to keep an eye out for them in the chat. Throughout the webinar, I also encourage you to share your own resources and experiences with us. We're on this learning journey together, and each of us has something valuable to contribute. Finally, we'll wrap up with the key takeaways. We'll also share some information about what you can look forward to from the Fearless Project and how we might be able to work together. All right, let me tell you the story of the Fearless Project. It all started here. In bold, we see on the screen the words, "You don't belong here." Have you ever felt this way? Do you feel this way at your place of work now? Distrust, exclusion, double standards, gaslighting. This lack of belonging and the fear that it stokes in us is our challenge. After more than a decade of working in the global aid and social impact sector, I have felt this way more times than I can count. And I'm painfully aware that it is 1,000 times worse for colleagues without the same privileges that I have. This is where the Fearless Project was born. In 2020, I thought long and hard about this need in the industry and where it met my passion and my ability. On the screen is a quote from Black lesbian mother, warrior, poet, Audre Lorde, which reads, "When I dare to be powerful, to use my strength in the service of my vision, then it becomes less and less important whether I am afraid." The hypocrisy of the sector of good and the pain that it has caused for so long was something that I knew I could no longer sit for. And I knew that I was not alone. As a non-binary woman of color with disabilities and roots in the Global South, I occupy a unique position as an insider, outsider, and a cross-cultural mediator. Because I have some marginalized identities, I can relate to the challenges of women, Black, Indigenous, people of color, and LGBTQIA+ colleagues, including people with disabilities. And because I have some privileges too, I can and do use these privileges to advocate on behalf of all of us. So this is me, Mahrukh Maya Hasan. I'm the founder and chief joy officer of the Fearless Project. I'm using my strengths as a researcher, designer, strategist, community builder, educator, and entrepreneur to pursue our vision of more equitable workplaces, especially in the global aid sector. With respect to my lived identities, I was born in the San Francisco Bay Area to Pakistani Muslim immigrants to the United States. These days, I'm based between Chiang Mai, Thailand, and San Juan, Puerto Rico. I'm a proud third culture, non-binary woman, trauma survivor, and an autistic person with invisible disabilities. So now that you know a bit about our story and me, let me tell you more about our work at the Fearless Project. So what is the Fearless Project? We are a global e-learning community for workplace diversity, equity, and inclusion. We are committed to helping rising social impact leaders, such as yourselves, build inclusive workplaces where everyone can flourish. This support is specifically in the form of online education and community building. Now, what really drives us? Joy. Let's take a moment to reflect. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross is one of the foremost scholars on grief and loss. You may have heard of her study on the 7 stages of grief. Elizabeth said, and I quote, "There are only 2 emotions, love and fear. All positive emotions come from love, all negative emotions from fear. From love flows happiness, contentment, peace, and joy. From fear comes anger, hate, anxiety, and guilt." It's true that there are only 2 primary emotions, love and fear, but it's more accurate to say that there is only love or only fear. For we cannot feel these 2 emotions together at the exact same time. They're opposites. If we're in fear, we are not in a place of love. When we're in a place of love, we cannot be in a place of fear. End quote. So why joy and not love? Here's why. Pursuing, fostering, and embracing joy is a revolutionary act that has its roots in liberation and future thinking. In particular, the fight for Black joy by Black scholars and activists is frequently equated as a fight for Black liberation. It is a concept that is revolutionary in that it is as much about self-awareness, self-love, and self-care as it is about loving the exterior world. At the Fearless Project, we have a bold vision of a world where every human being leads a life of purpose and joy while being their authentic selves. The movement we wish to build and nurture starts in the workplace, where we spend more than half of our lives. And since the pandemic, our work life intersects with our home life, so much more that it's a blur. So how do we commit to joy in our work? We do this through our values and our approach. So let me share with you our 5 core values. First, respect every human being. This means valuing and honoring another person, even if we do not approve of their words or actions. While there is no excuse for being an ass, we commit to treating everyone with dignity. Second, be insatiably curious. This means noticing, reflecting, and taking a deep breath before proceeding, especially when confronted with something or someone that is different. It means actively observing and listening, and most of all, asking questions, starting with yourself and then with others. At the Fearless Project, we love questions. And third, compassion over empathy. We commit to being compassionate instead of only empathetic, since they are actually different things. Empathy is a person's ability to take the perspective of and even the emotions of another person. Compassion, on the other hand, is when those thoughts and feelings include the desire and the ability to help. Empathy without boundaries can paralyze our decision-making and our ability to act. Boundary setting is therefore a big part of being compassionate. Fourth, be brave, not mean. Being brave is about challenging others and inviting discomfort for the sake of growth. As Brené Brown says, to be clear is to be kind. So we commit to being clear about our intentions as well as our expectations. Being mean, on the other hand, is criticizing others for the sake of pain and punishment, not for the sake of growth. In practical terms, this means we will always call in first, and only when absolutely necessary, we will call out. And finally, stay humble. At Fearless Project, we respect lived experiences just as much as we respect learned experiences. If you are a marginalized or underrepresented person, the experiences you have had are particularly valuable as we deconstruct and redesign the systems that currently devalue you. We reject the cult of white, Western, or Northern expertise when it does not take into account people's lived experiences. At Fearless Project, we commit to trust building and connection through co-design and collaboration. We are not the experts, you are. Now, before I introduce you to the people behind the Fearless Project, I'd like to share a little bit about our approach and what makes us different. At the Fearless Project, we are committed to real and lasting change based on what actually works. This means we will strive to be evidence-based, intersectional, accessible, engaging in everything we do. Our educational programs and community development are based on interdisciplinary studies drawn from social and behavioral science, social justice theory, organizational psychology, equity or liberatory design. None of this incredible work, though, would be possible without our team. So it's with great pleasure that I introduce you to them. First, we have Mahrukh and Chi, seen here on this slide, as well as myself, who make up our core team. Mahrukh Al-Zaid is Fearless Project's Business Development Manager. In the photo on screen, he is smiling and wearing a pink collared shirt. Mahrukh led our extensive DEI research and will be presenting a big part of today's webinar, so you'll get to meet him properly in just a bit. Thiago Monclar, who goes by Chi, is Fearless Project's Design and Events Manager. He is a communications professional and human rights defender. Chi developed this fabulous slide deck and has put in a lot of behind the scenes work for this event. In the photo on screen, Chi has brown hair and is wearing a black shirt. So this is our amazing core team, but we have also worked with a number of really wonderful partners. Our partners and collaborators have included marketing specialists, designers, researchers, facilitators, communications professionals, writers, activists, and artists. I want to take this moment to show gratitude to Anne, Sophia, Sharon, Sanum, Z, Emma, and Aminata for getting us where we are today and for your continued support. All right, now that you've met the team and understand what we're all about, let's move on to the research presentation. So, what's the problem we were looking at? We all know the global aid industry is born out of colonialism. Fast forward 500 years to today. On this slide, we see Kent Muckman's The Scoop, a 2018 painting which borrows from European history paintings to depict a horrifying scene: the kidnapping of Indigenous children from their parents in 1960s Canada. The painting, by an Indigenous Cree artist, is an indictment, and in 2018, a reminder of the truth that's supposed to precede any kind of reconciliation. After 500 years, good intentions are still not enough. In fact, they often mask harmful practices. Fortunately, a movement is building to deconstruct these systems and create change. Around the world and across the industry, there is a clear and urgent call to transform toxic work cultures born of the system into inclusive work cultures that finally put the humanity into humanitarianism. We recognize that toxic work cultures perpetuate distrust, exclusion, and fear. And we know that inclusive work cultures foster trust, belonging, and joy. Admitting the problem is the first step. It is a huge step, but it's not enough. Hashtag no white saviors, hashtag me too, hashtag aid to, hashtag Black Lives Matter. Rising leaders are speaking up and demanding change. Yet progress is limited. Why? Change is hard. We all know this. Rising leaders at organizations, including many of you, are seeking change, but don't know where to begin. You keep reaching dead ends because systemic change is met with resistance and available solutions just don't cut it. The problem is frustrating, it's dizzying, it's overwhelming. This is where we, Fearless Project, decided it was our mission to help. But first we needed to ask the question. So why are diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI initiatives, failing? What do we mean when we say DEI initiatives? This could be any kind of effort to change workplace dynamics and systems, such as diversity and inclusion training, working groups, task forces, policies, statements, recruitment programs, courses, coaching, employee research groups, and so on. Further, how are DEI initiatives failing, especially in the global aid industry? And what can we do about it? These are big questions, and we are seeking big answers. So we got to work. I'll pass it on to Mahrukh now to discuss our methods and findings as to why DEI initiatives fail.
Thank you, Maya, and hello, everyone. I'm Mahrukh Zaid, a cis, male, queer, light-skinned Arab with short black hair. My background is a white wall with a framed picture and a hanging ornament warding off the evil eye. To explore our research question, we read 180 articles, reports, and op-eds on the state of DEI broadly, and as it relates to the aid sector. We reviewed 35 courses from 17 companies, as well as 14 online communities. We also conducted a survey with 42 respondents from government institutions, nonprofit organizations, and NGOs who shared their experiences with DEI. Throughout our research, we came across incredible people pushing forward powerful movements for change. And in our audience today, we have over 100 people who are working in international aid and humanitarian work from around the world. Each of you is here because you are part of this movement and creating this collective change. You are the, excuse me, I'm just so excited. You are the rising leaders and change makers who have faced these broken systems. There is a lot of positive impact that DEI initiatives are making. We believe in the work and we want to share areas that can be improved to ensure greater sustained success. So stretch, take a sip of water. I know some of us had some audio issues with getting through Eventbrite. I am going to take us into the research and we are going to dig into what is not working in DEI initiatives. We discovered a common thread. DEI initiatives fail when they are reactive, misdirected, and poorly designed. When DEI is reactive, it treats symptoms, not root causes. When DEI is misdirected, it loses its way. When DEI is poorly designed, it can be ineffective and harmful. The first aspect of the problem deals with the why, or intention driving the DEI initiative. In high-profile cases across the sector, abuses have been going on for years. But it wasn't until groups of people began working together to expose and publicize the issues that organizations finally reacted. But they never seemed to go deep enough. Recently, a group called Decolonize MSF came together to document the sustained abuse at Doctors Without Borders. They spoke to current and former employees who were witnesses and survivors. In September, Decolonize MSF published a report. One thing it showed was a huge gap between their findings and the abuses MSF reported. In 2020, a period when Doctors Without Borders was publicly dealing with its abuses, the organization claimed that just 444 complaints had been made out of more than 63,000 staff members. Compare this with the Decolonize MSF findings, which found that just over half of their 359 respondents had witnessed or experienced one or more types of abuse at Doctors Without Borders during that same period. So I recognize that those two numbers are quite different, but what it's showing us is that without accountability and a true engagement with the victims of the abuse, without significant changes and reports about how those changes are taking place, DEI can be an empty gesture. Reactive DEI says, do a training, publish a statement. On the screen, you'll see text on the left side, which says bridge report, and a GIF of a bar graph that is rising up and to the right. Let me tell you a little bit about this report. A 2021 survey titled Benchmarking Race, Inclusion, and Diversity in Global Engagement, or BRIDGE, was created by a coalition of industry experts to develop a snapshot of diversity at all levels of organizations in United States-based headquarters of international development and humanitarian organizations. They found that 85% of organizations at the time of the survey were implementing at least one DEI initiative. But only 25% of the organizations had a DEI policy. Of those policies, 1/3 were published immediately after the protests against the murder of George Floyd in spring 2020. The policies may call for an inclusive organization, but it's often unclear exactly how this will be achieved or measured. This is demonstrated in how 75% of DEI policies focused on traditional HR issues like greater equity in recruitment, salary, and performance reviews, which are all really great baseline things to have, of course. These policies are important, but they are not enough. And this is what reactive DEI looks like. It is not effective because it stops short of transformation. I just want to also remind everybody that as you're collecting your thoughts and gathering questions, you can submit them in the Q&A and we will collate them for the panel at the end. Moving on the screen is a pull quote by Dennis Kennedy, who is the founder and chair of the US-based National Diversity Council. He challenges us to go beyond short-term performative commitments. He states, quote, "Racial justice is neither a moment or momentum. It is a movement that requires years of leadership, strategic work, and a top-down and bottom-up commitment from the institution." Reactivity is not all bad. Let's be honest, if a crisis can start a process for change, that's a good thing. The movement work, we want to acknowledge it is happening, it is real, and it is affecting change. At the same time, we have seen that if we don't involve the right people, the most marginalized and vulnerable will continue to be sidelined and harmed. So this is why who you involve in your initiative is key. And that's what I'll talk about next. DEI initiatives that fail are misdirected. Initiatives often prioritize organizational level changes without equipping people at all levels with the internal and interpersonal tools needed to transform mindset, behavior, and culture. Soft skills at the organizational level and organizational skills like mindset, behavior, communication, and empathy are just as critical to DEI work as hard skills. Things like data, goals, targets, processes, systems, and policies. DEI must involve all people across an organization. Otherwise, it's going to backfire when the bosses and toxic colleagues revert to prior behaviors, attitudes, and mindsets. On the screen, we have 3 circles that get smaller, and each of the circles has text inside them. The biggest circle has number 1, job tests. Medium-sized is number 2 with grievance systems, and number 3 is the smallest with mandatory DEI training. According to a 30-year-long study of over 800 organizations, the 3 most popular DEI initiatives make firms less diverse, not more. So job tests, grievance systems, mandatory DEI training. The problem is organizations are trying to reduce bias with the same kinds of programs they've been using since the 1960s. And the usual tools, diversity training, hiring tests, performance ratings, grievance systems, tend to make things worse, not better. The author's analysis of data shows that these tools actually decrease the proportion of minorities in management. They're designed to preempt lawsuits by policing managers' decisions and actions. The study shows this kind of force feeding can actually activate bias and encourage resistance. And I'm sure many of you have seen these happening live and in the flesh. What we know is that DEI cannot be top down or bottom up. It must operate from all directions. The next quote I'm going to share demonstrates the need to transform the soft skills and implicit bias. It comes from research that a global nonprofit think tank and advisory group called COQUAL did. They worked with a Chile-based firm that would seem to have no problems with diversity. One of their most valued employees was an indigenous Peruvian, a man who was respected, well-paid, and included in the leadership team's decision-making. On the screen is a pull quote, and it quotes this man. It says, "I know they value me, but I am an indigenous person, and they are white, legacy, and Spanish. They will never make me a partner because of my color and background." I was really shocked when I read this, and really I shouldn't have been, but it just shows how conventional measures and misdirected approaches to DEI would never flag this talented person as a victim of implicit bias. So, we've talked about the why and the who of DEI initiatives. Now it's time to talk about the how. DEI initiatives that fail are poorly designed. How you design the DEI initiative is crucial to its success. Evidence shows that after a one-time voluntary online diversity training, attitudes sometimes change, but the behavior of most groups will not. It is a tick-the-box exercise that avoids doing the real work. Here's the evidence. A group of researchers at the University of Pennsylvania's Wharton School of Business conducted a study of more than 3,000 employees from a large global organization. They wanted to know, but we want to know, what would happen if they created a training program for workplace DEI and rigorously tested its effects? They made it online, voluntary, and it took 1 hour. What they found was, for those who were already less supportive of women, diversity training produced attitude change, but not behavior change. Behavior only changed for people who were already strongly supportive of women before the training. And they found that their study showed very little evidence that the training affected the behavior of men and white employees overall, who are often the primary target audience for DEI training. What the researchers suggest is that organizations who want to improve their diversity training programs should diversify training, collect more data, and experiment. In other words, DEI has to be an ongoing and reflective process, not a one-off training. In our own survey of global aid workers across levels, respondents had some thoughts and feelings to share when we asked them, what is a problem that you have experienced with DEI courses, trainings, and workshops? The pull quote on the screen says, training employees to be more empathetic when they're probably insecure, stressed, overworked, and underpaid is putting a Band-Aid over a mortal wound. They also said things like, one-off trainings don't address deep-seated issues, that they're global north focused, accessibility is seriously lacking, and so on and so forth. I'm going to hand it over to Maya, but before I do, I know that we've gone through a lot, and I am interested, and the rest of the team is interested in knowing how you're feeling right now. So before I hand it off to Maya, just let us know in the chat, how do you feel? Use an emoji and 1 or 2 words.
Thanks, Parag, for that. I must say, I have to pick the crying face emoji. Wow, that was really depressing. But seriously, we want to take a moment here to validate what you all must be feeling. Like the problem is insurmountable. The challenge is too great. These failures are really discouraging. These are all valid feelings and thoughts. Believe me, I have felt them too. But all hope is not lost. We promise you that there are a lot of opportunities to be found in these challenges, and Mahrukh just shared a lot of valuable insights in the form of information and evidence about what can and does frequently go wrong with DEI work. We are confident that we can take these failures as learnings about how we can do DEI better. So with this in mind, let's return for a moment to recap what Mahrukh shared about what not to do. These are the qualities of DEI initiatives that we should avoid. When DEI is reactive, it's superficial and under-resourced. It treats symptoms and not root causes. When DEI is misdirected, it focuses on data and targets, but forgets about everyday behaviors and interactions. When DEI is poorly designed, it ignores people's needs and preferences. It neglects the building of trust and connection as part of the process. So what can we do differently? Let's look at the flip side of each of these challenges to find potential solutions. We say when DEI is reactive, it fails. So instead, let's look to making our DEI initiatives proactive or strategic. What do we mean by strategy? Strong DEI initiatives have a vision, mission, values, and goals that connect to the organization's larger strategic plan. They are proactive, long-term, and adequately budgeted. Easier said than done, but there is a way. Let's move to the next challenge about misdirected DEI. When DEI is misdirected, obsessed with data points at the expense of human behaviors, it fails. So instead, let's look to using a modular approach with DEI initiatives. What do I mean by this? Use an evidence-based, incremental approach to social, behavioral, and organizational change. Pace, don't race. Start with individual mindsets and thinking, then move to interpersonal skills and behaviors, and finally try to tackle the beast of the organization. Systems take time to change, and if humans behind them haven't changed their thinking or behavior, restructuring is not likely to change culture. And finally, we said when DEI is poorly designed, it fails. So instead, let's commit to co-designing our DEI initiatives. Build trust and share ownership in the DEI initiative by encouraging, but also not expecting or forcing everyone's input and feedback. Respond to the needs and preferences that people have shared with you, but also anticipate and observe what these needs and preferences might be. Trust and connection really are everything. So that's it. I sincerely hope that after all of our doom and gloom about bad DEI, that some of you are seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. There are a lot of challenges with DEI work, absolutely, but I promise you there are also many opportunities. So let's open up this space so we can learn from one another, shall we? Please continue to share your reactions in the chat. And in the meantime, let's move to our panel and see what our panelists think. So before I let the panelists speak for themselves, I'd like to introduce them. So it's with great pleasure that I get to introduce three incredible powerhouses in the world of DEI and global aid and development. These women are blazing trails in the sector, so I can't wait for you to hear from all of them. First, Evelyn Sallah, a gender, women's health, and M&E practitioner with 15 years of professional experience in the international development sector. She is the co-founder and CEO of ATF Consulting, the technical consulting arm of At the Forefront. She serves the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion team lead for organizational audits, serving international development agencies and the nonprofit sector. A native Sierra Leonean Gambian American, Evelyn is based in Nairobi, Kenya. Next, we have Jennifer Lentfer, a farm girl turned international aid worker, turned leadership coach, communication strategist, and writer-poet. As the creator of the blog howmatters.org, she was named as Foreign Policy Magazine's 100 Women to Follow on Twitter at the handle ITNL Do Gooder. She is also co-editor of the book Smart Risks, How Small Grants Are Helping to Solve Some of the World's Biggest Problems. And she also serves on the advisory circle of Healing Solidarity, an annual conference and online space focused on reimagining global development practice. And last, but certainly not least, we have Sanum Jain, a global development professional whose journey has taken her across multiple areas, such as startup social enterprise, program management and research. Currently, she is a technical manager at Agulus Applied Knowledge, working in the areas of safeguarding and equity and inclusion within UK aid. Sanum is an advocate for addressing the issue of underrepresentation of minoritized ethnic groups in UK international development. She co-founded REDI Collective, a network for people of color in the UK. Sanum was also a co-founding member of a Y Combinator-backed social enterprise startup. So I think we can bring up the panelists and get started. I hope I did you all justice with those intros.
Thank you, Maya. Very warm introduction.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, lovely to be here.
Great. Well, let's get started. So with our first question, and maybe we can go in the order of those introductions. First of all, what brought you into the global aid and development sector? And at what point did you notice that it was in need of repair and transformation?
Great question, Maya. I joined the sector 15 years ago. And I would say that the impetus was when I was 12 years old, living with my family in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. And I learned about female genital mutilation. At that time, I wasn't aware that the practice was widespread where I come from in Sierra Leone and the Gambia, but I spent the last decade or so working in sexual reproductive health, activism, and very much focused on women's rights, health, and justice. I would say during my career, and I sort of teetered between management, technical advice, and monitoring and evaluations and research, I found that my own personal experience of racism and gender bias led me to rethink my role in this sector. Of course, I built this think tank along with my co-founder, Alice Kabwe, who's here with us today, and we have ATF here. Most of us are activists that are completely focused on the intersectionality of dealing with race and gender bias, dealing with racism and at the same time, gender bias, particularly within the development sector. I've seen this day in and day out in my privilege as an American living as an expat in Africa, I was able to see how quickly the African women national staff or international staff were bullied, harassed, sidelined, and very quickly terminated without any cause. I also personally saw the mental trauma that many of us experienced in this sector. And unfortunately, despite wanting to really align with the Sustainable Development Goals, pushing forward with the activist movements that we've joined, I saw an exodus of Black African women, and this includes African women on the continent, African immigrants who returned, as well as African Americans. And through all of this, we decided that this has to change. That of course, we have the technical skills, we have the local knowledge, and we have the experience to be leaders in this field. However, that is not the case. And so that was really the birth of At the Forefront. We're a think tank, we hold critical discussions to deal with these issues as Black African women and girls and youth. At the same time, our consulting firm allows organizations that really want sustainable change in DEI to really shift the power scales, to really push the needle on this. And they've hired us to come in and provide strategic advice. And so I feel very fortunate in order to build this business, in order to be here with Fearless Project, with these amazing panelists to really reflect on how to do this right.
Thank you so much for being here, Evelyn. We really value your insights and your point of view as someone who, occupies this position, so many intersections. Thank you for sharing those thoughts. Let's move on to Jennifer. Jennifer, would you tell us a little bit about what brought you here to this point in your life and in your career, aid and development, and so much change that needs to happen?
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Maya, and so excited to be here with Evelyn and Sanum. I am a cis queer white woman in my mid-40s, and I have brown hair and thick blue glasses on. I was a volunteerist before that was a word. I can own it now. I came from an abusive home life and wanted to get as far away from as possible. And I think that story doesn't get told nearly enough in this sector. The desire to go so far away from home is not always for good reasons, right? And I was able to elevate my station. I actually could take economic steps forward by joining this sector, and I did. I think the moment I understood how flawed that was when I landed in my first job in Zimbabwe with my newly minted master's degree, supposedly learning how to fight poverty around the world. And I got to Zim, and all of my colleagues also had Masters of International Development from the University of Zimbabwe. And why was I here? That was the really first big clue. And I came from such a small town, a village, which is a rare experience sometimes. And so I really understood, if people came to our town, which by the way is dying in the US, there's real social problems here too. And we would welcome them. We would nod politely, and then we go on with our lives. And that's what was happening in the aid sector over and over and over. And so I could kind of see it. And it was really clear to me that I needed to question my role from the get-go.
Thank you for sharing, Jennifer. And I think as a white woman also being here and being able to recognize that privilege, and at the same time being an abuse survivor, and also recognize that level of marginalization as well. I think that's really powerful. Thank you for sharing. Sanum, I would love to hear more about the REDI Collective and your journey. You've had an interesting journey going, working with startups and then international development as well. What brought you to this point where you said enough is enough and I need to get involved in this transformation of the industry?
Absolutely, thank you. And thanks to both of you, Evelyn and Jain, for sharing your stories. Maybe in a nutshell of how I got to this point, I think, as Evelyn alluded to, both of you actually alluded to growing up with certain sets of experiences that made you see the world slightly differently. I come from a background that is, quite middle class in the UK. I'm Indian, second generation, British Indian, and from a very, very middle class educated background, but would very regularly go back to India, to where many of my family live, and through that almost was brought up to see through a lens that I've realized that not many of my community here in my town at least saw through, and that kind of guided kind of my career choices and other choices throughout up until this point. In kind of being at the stage where I'm now in international development and working within the private sector international development world, the point in which I realized that there were issues that needed to be addressed from a DEI perspective was when I came into contact with my co-founder of REDI Collective, Melissa Nicholson, and we realized that, even though I was a brown girl in the sector and she was a black girl in the sector, we actually felt more solidarity with each other and had a shared sense of understanding of the issues in the sector than many of our colleagues did. And that shared sense of solidarity was what led us to create the REDI Collective. We felt that there was a clear, for lack of a better word or phrase, old boys club that existed within the sector. We realized, as well as this kind of broader piece of trying to create a shift in power and transformational change in the sector towards the so-called global south, that actually in the interim there were so many inequalities within the UK and within the US, within headquarters. And we felt that within what was within our power, maybe within our sphere of influence, was maybe tackling that little bit first, and then hopefully that becoming a gateway to creating that more transformational change. So the REDI Collective is a network for people of colour within the global development sector to come together, network, share challenges and share wins in regards to diversity, inclusion and equity within our sector. So that's kind of a whistle-stop tour.
Oh, that's great. And I think you also spoke to where you decided to begin, where you decided to start, right? And I think that's that's a question that a lot of people have, is that there are so many problems. Where do you even begin? And so maybe we can go back to Evelyn if she's around. I see her video's turned off. So in the interim, we'll loop back to Jennifer about approaches, right? And how do you get started? And based on the research findings that we shared today, did you feel like any of those resonated with you? Do you tend to take any of those approaches? Have you seen any of those approaches? The good, the bad, the ugly? How do you approach your work in DEI?
Yeah, thanks, Maya. And at Healing Solidarity, we have been doing anti-racist work since before George Floyd's murder in our sector. And so we really are clear that we have to bring that lens, as well as an intersectional feminist lens to this work. What that means for us is a rebalancing. So we know that the foundation of this sector is fundamentally colonial and imperialist at its roots. And so how do we do that transformation without really killing and harming ourselves? I see so many people in the sector, and I think this even has come up in the chat already, how overwhelming it is, how much people feel powerless, and how much the fatigue of this is weighing on us. And so Healing Solidarity really actually started from that place of how do we take better care of ourselves and each other to be able to sustain this work, to address the harm of systems that have been put in place over hundreds of years, not just in the 20th century with our sector. So if we can't find that inner strength and emotional resilience on an individual level, and if we can't build collective power to make the change, we're gonna keep coming short. And so what really resonated with your findings, Maya and Mahrukh, is that when we take a Western pedagogical approach to DEI, when we relate to this as a teachable thing, we're missing the mark. That can never be the full story. We actually come from a place of how to do this as body work and somatic work, because trauma is stored in our bodies. Trauma enacts on us before we even know it's happening. So my goodness, talk about tricky to navigate. We think of this as ancestral work. Yes, we're part of a global aid system and sector, but we all have family stories that we bring to the table. We all have, we're all part of migration stories, and how does that work? And can we put ourselves in a bigger global context is one of the things we've really got to think about as well. One of the main critiques in our sector is that, oh, that's US stuff.
Yeah.
That's BLM, that's not here. But we have to understand that we're operating, there's like an operating system in the world. If we think of white male human supremacy as this way to organize power, well, that's operating in every single context where our sector works. It looks different. It absolutely looks different. We cannot do the cookie cutter thing, which
Sure.
you think we'd know by now. But now it's a moment of how do we understand ourselves in a bigger story? And then how do we get creative? My gosh, I'm so excited that you all are bringing the joy factor, because we have to break out of the mold of the way that we do things. Like our sector's toolbox is like policy development, project management, and God bless that toolbox, but it's insufficient.
And there's a time and place, right? So for all of those things.
And how do we supplement that? Yeah.
Sure. Thank you, Jennifer. I'd like to come back to Evelyn. We lost you for a minute when your video cut out. So what we were asking about was starting points. Where do you even begin? How do you even approach this beast of a problem? I understand the healing solidarity is really focused on the individual, the interpersonal, like the healing that happens inside. Where do you start, Evelyn? At the Forefront, ATF Consulting, what is your approach to all of this?
So as mentioned earlier, part of the work that we do is initiate critical and difficult conversations. And I think that's one piece of this DEI work that folks try to shy away from. They think they can just, maybe hire a chief of diversity or put one policy in place or show some data about women in the C-suite. And in some way, that's their response to this whole question of DEI. However, I think it's important for us to all see ourselves as human and accept the fact that all of us have biases. Now, whether these biases are conscious or subconscious, we all have them. And I think there's this guilt and this feeling of we're so afraid to confront, in particular, issues around race. And I think this, point, Jennifer, you were making about, oh, this is an American thing, this is a BLM thing, that's where it really comes from. When we talk about DEI and people, talk about women, it seems to be a very safe and comfortable place to talk about, all these women that are rising. But let's get a bit deeper there. Maya, I love that you share that you have a disability that's non-visible. This is one area that we find with our clients is completely just left out. This whole idea of people living with disabilities, those that have disabilities that are non-visible, let's have those difficult conversations about race. Let's accept that we're human. Let's accept that this is about shifting power, shifting powerful paradigms, and accepting that we've all been part of the system. So where do we go from here? And so ATF, we're very much encouraging our clients to have those conversations, whether it's in these workshops, in these facilitated conversations, and of course, definitely never a one-off forced engagement. It has to be an organizational investment in order for it to work, that is long-term, that is sustainable. And if you do have a DEI chief or a committee, let them be empowered and have the resources they need in order to fully change and shift organizational culture. And at the same time, have a survivor-centered approach. Because of the trauma, there's this assumption that if people are silent, then the organizational culture, there's no issue. And I think teasing out those stories, finding out, particularly from those staff members that are marginalized, what is your experience? How are we serving you? And if you are a survivor of trauma, how are perpetrators being brought to justice? And I think that those are the pieces that folks try to shy away from. And so I look forward to hearing more. And that evidence was fantastic about how to move forward from that.
Great. Evelyn, you brought up a really good point about trauma and silence and the role of that. I think I'd like to bring it back to Sanum and ask, because you work with, your network is of people of color in the UK international development industry. And these are a lot of people who are marginalized, who are underrepresented, minoritized, probably people who have experienced some of this. And there may be an expectation. I think we put people in boxes of like, oh, they must know the answer. Oh, let's ask them. I'm curious to know also how you run your group, and also how you deal with these kinds of questions, right? Does the fact that you're a network of people of color in the aid industry automatically mean that you're focused on DEI issues? Or are there many other things, right?
Absolutely. So there's a few different ways in which we engage, the REDI Collective engage with our members. Originally, we were a LinkedIn group, and we still operate that LinkedIn group. And in the beginning, it was just to see how many of us were out there who looked a little bit like us. We didn't know. And we didn't really, we know that lots of mapping is being done across various aspects of EDI within the sector, but we just wanted to show that there were other people who looked like us within the sector. That then spearheaded into a series of events with organisations like DevEx and with British Expertise on different elements of diversity, whether that and inclusion, whether that was from an HR perspective, bringing in those who are actually within organisations, so mainly private sector international development organisations, to learn, or whether that is just networking opportunities for entry-level people of colour in the sector who are yet to be in the sector. And what that has become now are monthly or almost monthly booster calls that we call them, with people of colour in the sector who are specifically looking to improve diversity, equity and inclusion within their organisations. So to answer your question, we have actually become kind of both, a kind of almost like a support system for those within the sector, but then also a support system for those who are doing this work and who and look to us to do this work as well. And to your point of kind of where we're at and where our entry point is, I think where we really operate is helping those people operate within the organizations they're in reality. So meeting our organizations where they're at, because not every organization is ready for the transformational change that is needed. And, that's not ideal, but it's kind of the reality. And I think Melissa and I have a realist approach to the work that we're doing, having both been very much a part of inclusion efforts within private sector organizations, understanding the bottlenecks, understanding, like Jennifer said, all of the processes and the project management that needs to happen and the policies that need to be created. And there's a very big focus on quick wins. What is it, the quick win that we can have that can get us to a better point? And nobody really accepting that actually the underlying fundamental and structural change is what needs to happen. So I guess we're a platform that helps the people who are trying to show that to organizations, help them along and support them in the work that they do.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been balancing that because it's true that a lot of people who are survivors of toxic workplaces are going to be the ones who are really demanding change. At the same time, quite a lot of them don't want to deal with it. You know, it's like them being forced or being forced upon them. So that's something that I also think about sometimes is give people the option, you know, encourage them to speak up and do it, but don't force anything. They've experienced enough trauma, right? Yeah. Is anything else any of the other panelists would like to add on that note?
I actually had one more point that I wanted to mention based on what Evelyn was talking about survivor-centric approaches, and where maybe to your earlier question on where things have gone well, or, you know, parallels we can draw. I actually think the work that is currently being done within organizations on safeguarding and the prevention of sexual exploitation and abuse in the aid sector, albeit though has its challenges, has really in the last few years accelerated. And the reason for that is because of pressures from various different angles within the sector. Now, if we have those same sorts of support and pressures from different points in the sector, then maybe we'd get to a place where we were supporting those people within the sector who are affected by racism and other sorts of isms.
Yes, Sanum. I think about that none of us should be doing this work alone. And I think that's where Healing Solidarity was born, is that people were just needed to let it out, needed to be in community. And I am over the moon about the various communities that exist to hold all of this with us, because it's and I would say that from my work, particularly with white folks in the sector, they've got to be able to release that they're the good ones. That acknowledgement of complicity is so vital and painful. But don't burden others. Let's get together and like sit with that, and then figure out what is needed from us to be able to share power more effectively. And for me, that has meant giving up comfort, convenience, assumed authority, and my access to resources. I've got to be prepared to give that up. And that is where there's so much that can be also really exciting on the other side of that. Because when we are actually able to share and build collective power together, there's so much more ease. There's so much more joy. There's so much more collectivity that actually can feed all of us and the world we want to build. So this is a rocky terrain, as Evelyn was saying. Like, we all have things to unlearn, but we also have things to relearn, like how to be together in ways that don't reinforce hierarchy of power. Because by the way, we've structured our organizations to be hierarchical as well. So they're just doing their job. If you're not speaking, it's because unless you're the CEO, and even the CEO will tell you that they are submissive, or they don't have their own authority. So if no one has any authority in this system, then how the hell is it supposed to change? So how do we step into that, our individual roles and our collective responsibility at this time?
I think on that note, I'm going to go to one of the questions that we have in the Q&A about hierarchy. Jennifer, you mentioned hierarchy. So maybe the others, Evelyn or Sanum, can comment. This question is about states. Organizations often require the assignment of formal and informal hierarchies. How do you navigate or eliminate these power struggles in your own organizations? So perhaps Evelyn, you want to take a stab at that?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, because I think, you know, Susan, who's an audience member, I was just telling her that she really hit the nail on the head, talking about the accountability that's held by funders, donors, and those that may in fact create some of this this hierarchy and do it in a way where your national origin is your privilege, and you carry that with the revenues, with the funding mechanism. I think the other elephant in the room is that we're really talking about livelihood here. So I love what you're saying, Jennifer, about the power, shifting the power, putting it in the hands of community and people, local people, because what does that mean for all those that came into the paradigm and said, I worked really hard to get here. I have this degree. I have all this experience. And for this reason, this is the justification why I am here and why I need to be at the level where I am, and you need to be down there. And I think getting away from that mind shift and think about a collaborative work culture, a culture that's not based on this type of hierarchy. You know, we're talking about decades of organizational and really people change to reflect on the sector itself, but then also think about, I know I can make a difference if I put everything that I have, all the skills and my resources in the hands of the people, that I don't have to be the one to represent the voices of those quote unquote marginalized communities that are served. So yeah, I mean, I would just say that this is another big piece is how do we navigate this whole idea of, I worked really hard to get here. My PhD is more value than the local women in the communities, and is for this reason that I am here. It's just it's more of a question and a comment.
Right. Yeah. Sanum, do you have any thoughts about that, or Jennifer?
I just wanted to pop in real quick and notice the chat. That's we're really focused on donors, and it's a pitfall. I just want to name it as a pitfall. It's so easy to villainize the donors and be like, oh, they're just horrible. Well, if we don't include the donors in our view of transformation and their ability to change too, we're going to miss it. We cannot continue to blame it on them or, you know, give up our own power. We've got to really, they can't do their work without us. So the same way you manage up in your organization, we have to manage up our donors.
Sure. Sanum, go ahead.
Yeah, it's such a great point, Jennifer. And I think we are bringing it back to what you've all spoken about the human element of the work that we're doing. When we talk about funders, donors, clients, counterparts, whoever they are, every organization we're talking to, we're actually talking to people. We're talking to humans at the other end of the Zoom link or the meeting table. And so although we might have this kind of homogenous view of what a funder or donor looks like, in reality, maybe there's power in us being able to have relationships with our counterparts at these organizations, and maybe they can, you know, they can also change things within their organization. Working at the moment with a government department that is looking to engage in this work, and the people who we're working with are, you know, serious about change, but we have to remember they operate within a system as well, and in as much, you know, that they themselves as humans are looking to make this change. And sometimes for me, I feel like, you know, as an individual doing this work, that won't say is enough, but it really goes a long way for, you know, as Maya was asking, how do we deal with this work in the first place when it can be quite traumatic. And I think I also want to make the point that where things have maybe gone right is this kind of co-creation that we've all been talking about as well. It's not about it being top down or bottom up. It has to go both ways. And all efforts that have kind of a co-created fundamental basis are the ones that are going to actually do well. And when we say co-created, it's not just, you know, within an HQ that the CEO and the analyst are all working together. It's also ensuring that there's co-creation across the different countries in which you operate that actually take into account the context in which diversity inclusion is being spoken about. What that looks like in Nigeria is totally different to what that looks like in London, you know, in the UK. And what that looks like in India and in different parts of India is going to be totally different to what that looks like in Nigeria. So us having, as we talked about, this kind of top-bottom approach, that hierarchy exists not just kind of through donors, but also through the way in which we have our organizations. And I think once we start looking at things more contextually, and then I think that's the way change is going to happen.
Yeah, I just wanted to chime in on the donor piece again, where there are philanthropists that I think are doing a really great job, that have a trust-based philanthropist model, and allow organizations to shape interventions based on the local context and drive results. However, and I see, Carolyn, your comment as well about having firsthand experience. Many of us have been in spaces where donors are so deeply involved in implementation that they're even involved in the nationality of who is recruited. And I think that it's good to see both sides of the stories, that they're human, that there are donors that are doing a great job, but at the same time, there are many that are aware of the reports that staff have published around bullying, around harassment, and they still continue to mobilize resources for those very same agencies without any ramifications. So I think working hand in hand with them is definitely the way to go. However, at the same time, naming and calling their role in unfortunately repeating some of these more destructive cycles is also part of the healing process.
Yeah, let me go back to another question we have here about an anonymous question. I work in Southwest Asia and North Africa in development, and the majority of people in senior management are well-meaning white people or privileged Arabs. Doing DEI training is much more difficult with senior teams than junior teams. It is tough to even get them to acknowledge that there is an issue, no matter how many statistics and studies I share. What can I do for leadership buy-in who undermine DEI and don't acknowledge the need for change? Anyone want to take a stab at that?
Yeah, I think I just wanted to say that this is really about power. It's really about where does the power sit and what does the world look like when the shift of when that power shifts and you no longer have that power. It's fear, I believe, at the root of this. And also, I think perhaps a little bit of fragility and guilt that may be that underlying emotion that I've seen, at least senior leaders that have very, just difficulty confronting what DEI and organizational change looks like. And I think even at times when running surveys with their own staff and actually being able to absorb the findings of those staff members that are in those marginalized groups that have experienced bullying and harassment, it's very difficult for senior leaders to accept it and really reflect on a collaborative way forward to prevent and respond to these issues. But yeah, I mean, I think that's a work in progress. We all should collaborate and reflect on how to move forward on.
I may add to that, and I really agree with this point. I've been in many situations where there's also almost a case of denial once even the data is presented. Everybody wants data. Everyone wants to see the evidence that racism exists in their, whether it's in their organization or in general, which is ridiculous. But they see the data. They see the results from interview panels. They see the results from surveys. But then they want the feedback in the abstract, but they don't want to deal with it in reality. And the way that I feel that senior leadership is a great question about how you engage senior leaders who are undermining DEI. What I've seen is, again, with in the fear of using the master's tools, but in terms of the influence that others might have, can really make a difference. So again, we operate as organizations in a space, in a sector. If a CEO of one organization is seeing a CEO of a competitor organization doing something or being part of a working group or putting out a statement on an element of inclusivity, that matters. I have heard, people say that organization is doing that. Why are we behind? And having sat on some of these working groups that exist and having been a part of those conversations, by getting all of those people into a room from different organizations that sit within the same space, that to me is unfortunately then what drives the that tends to drive whether it's through pressure or the stick, that is what drives change sometimes, or at least provides that first step to then create change. And I see from smiles that people know that also is the case. And whether that's unfortunate or not, I think that goes back to my point about why the REDI Collective exists. We're trying to operate within the reality of the the reality within which we're all operating. So it's difficult, but I think once if that's a specific example for the anonymous person who asked, if there are other leaders or other organizations that are adjacent to yours doing things, showing that to your leadership could be the changing point, so that they don't feel like they're being left behind.
Yeah, I'd say that's a really great point, Sanum, about competition, or just saying, what everyone else is doing. There's a little bit of shame and guilt in that, right? If you're not doing your part. And so the Bridge report, I thought, was very interesting for that reason, because in a way it was trying to benchmark what are organizations doing. As far as I know, it was anonymous, one. Two, it actually talks about the lack of transparency when it comes to data, and the lack of intersectionality, and the lack of disaggregation when it comes to the data. So while we shouldn't obsess on data points, there's also people's experiences and anecdotes and stories of what they've experienced. The lack of transparency, the lack of sharing of data about what's actually going on in the industry and at different organizations. Do you know of any good models of organizations that are actually sharing or open about their work? Or how do we encourage them to be?
In terms of examples, oh, sorry, no, Evelyn, you go.
No, go for it, Sanum.
I think it's less the organizations themselves, but probably more the grassroots organizations that are working with consultancies and aid organizations to help them get there. So, for example, the Equity Index, which is an organization in the UK who have just piloted an index for both internal and external indicators that UK consultancies within our space can look to and improve on, is something that is quite a good. I won't say they're still in the process of looking at how that's going to work in a kind of more sustainable way, but that to me was something that was really a really good initiative, and something that gave organizations benchmarks to work with, and was also spearheaded by women of color. So that's also another great thing, that the actual initiative was through that with funding. So that's one kind of example, but not an actual organizational example.
Yeah, I wanted to share a story of a client that actually wanted to ensure that we got all the data we needed in the organizational audit. So they, in fact, wrote legal waivers to former staff who had signed non-disclosure agreements upon being terminated from the organization. And I think that kind of behavior, it's very genuine, and it's very open for an organization to say, we know that these employees were terminated. We know they were, for whatever reason, they had to sign NDAs. And because we believe so deeply in this audit and we want to know how to change, we're willing to allow them to share their experiences, share their perspectives, despite the fact that they were terminated or had other kind of issues when departing from the organization. That type of authentic, genuine openness, it's very refreshing as a DEI assessor or consultant to come into that type of space. I also really respect organizations that when they do find that there's a history of errors in any kind of way, in terms of discrimination, in terms of biases, that have actually come out and confronted them and published external statements to say, these are mistakes we've made. Here's our plan on how we plan to address this. And we want to acknowledge all of the survivors, all of the victims that came through here and experienced this toxic workplace and these abuses. And we want to hear you, and we actually want to be public about our efforts. Again, that shows genuineness in the efforts. And then of course, coming back and seeing, okay, well, what's happened a year in, 2, 3, 5 years is critical. But that type of behavior I find to be really refreshing in a space where DEI is just such difficult work.
Well, and to really tie it to the previous question around leadership, I think what we're calling for is a different modality than the models of patriarchal leadership we've been given, which is where you have to be decisive and linear and always know exactly everything, really rooted in expertise and authority. I'm really chuffed whenever I encounter a leader who is willing to say, I don't know. Like, can we normalize, I don't know, or this is hard, or this is taking longer than I thought. I want to make a big plea to all organizations right now who are thinking about how to do DEI and inclusion work and anti-oppression work well, is to slow the truck down. We are absolutely falling prey to our own ambition. And I love that about us. I love that about our sector. And it is also killing us. It's the end of the year in the Northern Hemisphere. It's time to wind down. It's time to go into introspection and reflection. Do you know how much is on my to-do list right today? Like, it's ridiculous because it's end of year and we've got to spend the money. And so we've got to have a different mode of leadership. And we've got to also bring our anti-capitalist lens to this, because we continue to try to emulate the business world. And if anyone hasn't noticed, that's not going so well for the planet. So this is our time as a sector to say, how do we actually want to live our values? And so the organizations that I'm really excited by are often small funders who are willing to see their work as reparation and redistribution, and who are really clear that we've got to get money into the hands of people that are actually doing the work and get out of the way. And that's where my hope lies.
Yeah, I would maybe follow up on that with a question from the audience, which links back to why we do what we do to begin with, right? We are the global aid and international development sector. We are a sector of good, right? So good intentions do not always lead, quite the contrary, to good outcomes, right? And so we have a question from the audience. Would love to hear any good examples of how internal DEI work has been joined up with an organization's external work. For example, more inclusive programs at the community level, at the grassroots level, and whether the organization started from within or without. So that'll have to be our last question, unfortunately, because time is running short. But Evelyn or Sanum, if you'd like to take that first stab at it.
Again, maybe without an example, but more of it, I just think it's a great question, because what I find in doing EDI work is that often people conflate it with programmatic GESI, gender and social inclusion work, and then there's always a confusion about what we mean. And at least for my understanding, it's that the EDI work is on the organizational level and it's on the structural level, and the GESI work is on the, feeds down from that, really is. And any good GESI work will be coming from an inclusive organization, and is more programmatic. And so for me, in theory, if there are more diverse set of leaders of an organization, of decision makers, if there are more diverse ways of looking at a program and looking at the work that we're all doing, then therefore the work that we do in the communities that we serve will be more inclusive, and maybe not just focus on the gender of gender and social inclusion, which is what very much happens at the moment. But I'm not a GESI expert, but still.
Yeah, I also just want to commend the person who asked the question. I think it's a fantastic question. I also have not seen that specific type of example. However, there has been a movement in the international development sector where we've seen that the leadership of certain organizations that serve regions, particularly, I'll say, especially when we think of Latin America, and even some parts of South Asia, it's a lot of local national leadership, or even leaders that come from that cultural context. And I think that seeing more of that type of shift when we talk about what does diversity mean, making leaders diverse, I think pushing the envelope more and saying, actually having representation from the communities that are being served, people who understand the cultural, geographical, political, social, and economic, every piece of the dynamics that come from those societies, and having those types of leaders in those roles, I think that's where the shift I would have major movement in this sector, and I think has quite a long way to go, but with some hope and continued work together, I could see it happening.
And while it might be hard to build cultures of care when in these very strict professional settings, the bigger the organization, we can build cultures based on consent. So when we say survivor approach or trauma informed, it really has to normalize no being a valid answer. And that will reorganize everything when our partners can say, oh no, we're not doing that. That doesn't fit with our assessment and view of what's needed in this community. We need this. When we can get to that place, we've done it. We've done the work.
Yeah, the power of no, right? And on that note, so we're gonna have to wrap up. I didn't want to because the conversation was just getting good, but I want to just say thank you, a heartfelt thanks to the panelists for contributing your time to such an important conversation, and also thanks to all the audience members who shared their own comments, experiences, and insightful answers to some of the questions. So for those questions that didn't get answered, we're going to keep them in mind for future events and try to come back to them. And so to wrap up, where do we go from here? I invite you all to take a moment to think about how you are planning to start or change your DEI practice following this event. Was there anything you found especially valuable from this conversation that you had not heard before or considered before? Let us know. And now let me take a moment as we wrap up to share with you what you can expect to come next from the Fearless Project. So I think we're gonna bring up a slide deck again. Thank you, panelists. Great. So where do we go from here? Let me share with you what we are building towards. So we have two major goals. I think we can go to the next slide. Fantastic. So our two major goals, the Fearless Project. First, we are laying the groundwork for a highly curated community of practice around workplace DEI with a focus on the global aid and development sector. This will primarily be an online community and co-designed by community members from around the world. Second, we are designing and developing a groundbreaking e-learning experience. This will be in the form of an affordable, cohort-based series of online courses that are modular by nature. They will include self-paced content, as well as a dedicated gathering space for learners and a strong coaching component. We plan to partner with DEI course developers, practitioners, and coaches to build this together. These are our goals that we hope to reach sometime in the next year. In the meantime, and as we work towards them, we are offering a few other things. So here's what we're currently offering: educational events on DEI in the global aid sector. Events like these: DEI training that is voluntary, strategic, modular, and co-designed. Training that is evidence-based, like we talked about. And finally, coaching for rising leaders and leaders rising to the occasion. These are people such as yourselves that are committed to DEI work and are looking for support and guidance on how to move forward. So what's left to do? At the Fearless Project, we have a glorious vision of joy at work, but it's going to take a village to get there. If you're willing and able to help, here are 3 really concrete ways in which you can support our mission to transform toxic workplaces. First, consider partnering with us. Reach out and let us know if you're a facilitator, trainer, curriculum or course developer, maybe you're a coach or a community manager, or you have any other skill set you think we might need. We're looking to partner with all sorts of people and organizations to reach our goals of building and designing a truly groundbreaking e-learning community around workplace DEI. Second, help us co-design our community of practice. Let us know if you're interested in being on our community member research panel. We want to do this right, so we value getting your input and feedback from the start. And finally, join the waitlist and keep in touch. If you haven't already, sign up for our mailing list at fearlessproject.co and follow us on social media at WeBeFearless on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and Instagram. Share our work with your friends and colleagues. We really could use all the help we can get. Now to close, I want to remind everyone about the type of space that we are trying to create. We started this webinar talking about distrust, exclusion, double standards, and gaslighting. We talked about toxicity and negativity and being made to feel like you just don't belong. I'm committing to you today that no matter who you are or where you are from, you will always have a place at the Fearless Project. We are building a brave space for the rising leaders of a broken colonial industry. In this space, we will respect each other, learn from each other, center the experiences of the most marginalized, and practice both compassion and courage. You will always belong here. Thank you so much for coming to the Fearless Project's very first virtual event. Before you go, we would greatly appreciate your feedback. How did we do? What did you like? What did you not like? Please take a minute to fill out the poll that has just popped up on your screen. We will use your feedback to improve future events. Thanks again and take care. The event will close once everyone has taken the survey. Goodbye, everybody. Wishing you a wonderful end of year. And you can always drop us a line via email, hello@fearlessproject.co.